Hello, everyone. Happy belated St. Patrick's Day. I am Aishan Hutchinson, the director of the creative writing program here at Cornell, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this, the third event in the spring 2021 Barbara and David Zalaznick reading series together. After tonight's reading, there will be two more in the series. Please check out our website for more details and sign up to be added to our email list. The series is made possible thanks to the generosity of our donors, Barbara and David Zalaznick, to whom we extend our bountiful thanks. This evening's event, which features the stunning poet Sharif Shanahan, is the Eamon McEnany Memorial Reading. Eamon McEnany, in addition to being one of Cornell's most talented and best-loved athletes, was a dedicated husband and father, loyal friend, prolific writer, poet, and an American hero. He died on September 11, 2001, in the North Tower of the World Trade Center. 8 years before the 9/11 attacks, when terrorists ignited a bomb at the World Trade Center, as reported by the New York Times, Mr. McEnany led more than 60 people down 105 flights of stairs, having them sound off so no one would be lost in the blinding smoke. Before his death, Mr. McEnany wrote a poem entitled For Bonnie, addressed to his wife. In case I die, and the heart and the breath and the mind don't shine, and the arms and the legs and the eyes can't find, and all things unimportant seem suddenly sublime, then the end is a bend in the road that we'll never find, a death I will always defend you from. Mr. McEnany's poetry is collected in the posthumous volume, A Bend in the Road, which has a moving introduction by his wife, Bonnie. This evening's memorial reading is made possible by Mr. McEnany's family, his Cornell teammates, and friends. We're deeply fortunate to have Sharif Shanahan as part of the series. He's joining an esteemed line of poets and writers who have read in the series, including Seamus Heaney, Edna O'Brien, Evan Boland, Alice McDermott, Colum McCann, and Paul Muldoon. Shanahan will be introduced by my colleague, Joni Makowski. After the reading, Professor Makowski will moderate a conversation with him. You can participate in this conversation by submitting questions in the chat throughout the event. A final reminder that this event is being recorded. Now, over to you, Joni.
Thank you, Aishan. I'm delighted delighted and honored to introduce Sharif Shanahan. Sharif Shanahan is the author of Into Each Room We Enter Without Knowing, which came out in 2017 and was a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award for Gay Poetry and the Publishing Triangle's Tom Gunn Award, and winner of the Crab Orchard series in Poetry First Book Award. Shanahan's poems appear in APR, the New York Public, the New York Times Magazine, PBS NewsHour, Poetry Magazine, and in many anthologies. He's a recipient of a National Endowment for the Arts Literature Fellowship, of the Wallace Stegner Fellowship at Stanford University, and a Fulbright Senior Scholar Grant to Morocco. He's from the Bronx and is currently Assistant Professor of English and Creative Writing at Northwestern. His first book, Into Each Room We Enter Without Knowing. These poems offer complex, intricate meditations on identity and relationship. One doesn't just read this book. One enters its alchemical transformations as the poems reshape the way one senses and knows. The poems reshape the way one is and the way we are. Sharif Shanahan's poetry is a sage alchemy, Its spells come as exquisitely precise observation, as in the poem titled Wanting to Be White. The poem is actually a description of a waterfall. It begins, how easy for the waterfall to turn back into the river. And then we're looking at the waterfall, and the poem, I quote, "Then within the waterfall, a shadow moves, a turtle or kelp wavering, drifting, reaching, trying to exist beyond its own watery nest, and the face darkens, quickens, stills. The waterfall insists on its own incessant breaking, an anxiety, a completion at once its own negation, merging at its most opaque with the waiting body, froth gathering, evaporating." As the poem continues with that waterfall, Shanahan describes the water's circular endurance. So these poem spells also come as precise attention to the music in words, the play of sound transmuting the abstraction of language into what's immediate and reverberating. In these poems, interior and exterior faces, facets, windows, boundaries, they serve to construct individuals, speakers, the containers that construct individuals and also pour them out, release, excluded. And as Sharif is reading new work tonight, I'm going to take the liberty of reading a poem called Song from his first collection. Song. I wait each night for a self. I say the mist. I say the strange tumble of leaves. I say a motor in the distance, but I mean a self and a self and a self. A small cold wind coils and uncoils in the corner of every room, a vagrant. In the dream, I gather my life in bundles and stand at the edge of a field of snow. It is a field I know but have never seen. It is nowhere and always new. What about the lives I might have lived? As who? And who will be accountable for this regret I see no way to avoid? A core or a husk? I need to learn not how to speak, but from where. Do you understand? I say name, but I mean a conduit from me to me. I mean a net. I mean an awning of stars. Sharif Shanahan's poetry enacts a way of knowing. It reminds readers that poetry is a practice, a method of learning. Poetry is a discipline that allows a self to cohere, to sing, to make music that breaks self apart and yields connection. Please join me in welcoming Sharif Shanahan.
Thank you so much, Joni, for that moving introduction, and to you, Aishin, and everyone at the Creative Writing Program at Cornell for the invitation. I'm honored to read for you and specifically as a part of this series, this event, and thank you again. I'm going to read from my eventual second collection, which is nearing completion, and I'll read from each of the sections. The book exists in 3 parts. And I was excited when the invitation came in because I saw that there was a theme of togetherness and connection that was explicitly stated, as kind of the rubric or the lens for the series. And the belief that we are all one. The belief in human oneness might make some people in the audience who I can't see roll your eyes, but it's a bone deep belief that motivates me and agitates me into making, given the social division of the world, right? And so when I saw the theme, I was thrilled because my belief, is that we of course are all one, right? So not different versions of the same thing, the very same thing, and that we are acculturated out of that oneness, and given a language and a race and a gender and a name, and part of what moves me about lyric poetry and has led to the longevity of my commitment to it is the way that it can unify us, even temporarily, even for just a moment. So I'm going to read from the first section to start. And these poems are the poems that most explicitly deal with questions of mixed race identity. I was born into a mixed race family. My father is Irish American from New York, and my mother is a Black Arab from Morocco. And most of my family on my mother's side are still there. So thank you so much again for the invitation, and to all of you out there in the ether for being here. Mulatto quadroon, somewhere between. I want to tell you what for me it has been like. To speak at all, I must occupy a position. Though the system provides positions, I appear not to occupy. Though some say such non-position is my position, speak from that placeless place outside the system, etc., some would say and have said. If the placeless place is created by terms of the system, then it must be within the system, even if it appears otherwise. And so it may be that the position which is presumed to be a position of body might better be regarded as a position of thought or a receptivity to possible experience, as conceived by the still implausible eye of a man who defined the flat and flimsy self he carried against those whom he did not understand or know or in any real sense see. And if the possible vision of that implausible eye accounted for you in name only, then filed you under consequence, side effect. It is not that the system fails to position you, it positions you actively and specifically nowhere, so that you appear on the outside, but remain within, or you appear within, but remain on the outside, which is to say, in other words, apart and a part. And so if to speak in a particular social world, I must occupy a position, and that social world consists of positions that are clear, but none of which clearly I occupy, then it may be that I cannot, even if I want to, tell you what for me it has been like. And so, colonialism. At intersections, I knew to look both ways, as she had taught me, as she had known to look both ways at the port of arrival, not to Ellis Island or to JFK, but to the white blanket of my father, then back to her mother, then away. So that when the one summer we returned to the land she had left, and the four of us, she, myself, my two tanned brothers, stood below the open Casablanca sun, waiting on a thinly grassed divider for a sliver to open up within the traffic, the air smart and nearly visible, as neighbor boys pointed down from windows, "Mricani, Mricani," and I dashed through the exhaust of 4 lanes, not exactly a highway, but still too wide to be crossing, and without a crosswalk, no less. She rushed to the other side and slapped my backside hard. "Elesh, mon fille, why would you do that to me?" Exile. It happened inside a single room for me. Forgive me if you feel with this assertion that I take from you or the integrity of your story. But it's true. I was nowhere there, flanked by my and my brother's beds on the frayed brown carpet, looking into the tiny holes of the radiator cover, dark eyes piercing through painted white metal. When I looked around, I saw nothing that I was, not even other nothings like me. Do you think I take from you? I do not take from you. I am you. Self-determination with the question of race. In this room, the red of my lips turns mahogany. My spleen carries the sickest cells away. Is it still a revelation to say we are who we say we are? I told Abdurrahim that the ocean alters, means, but he didn't listen. He begged for Twinkies and cable TV. In the razor blade, tiny coarse curls gather, coarser in summer. I let my body tan in California and say, maybe now. Shara asks what it means to be seen, and she is exactly right. I laugh. Most days, I quietly fight. I refuse your stale gaze, your arrogant pity. Don't you know you're implicated too? I take my coffee black. I brush my teeth, the hair on my dying scalp. I try to love other Black men because the world. If Mary and her lamb, if Allah, if you, if latitude and longitude, if the trees once emptied stood upright again. I take nothing from you when I say I am. Once I wrote on a napkin, I just want to live, and it startled me, true as it was. Some of us don't even see how we see. From a distance, Safia takes my hand. Al-Asmarani, I see you, my brother. After giving my lover head, I wipe my mouth with my shirt sleeve like a child. If there is a question, if it is, how much blood? From the monkey bars, a child hangs by his knees, face flush, counting the coins on the playground rubber, then climbs to the top of the slide and looks directly into the sun. If you need me to measure or pour, since there is a question, if you need me, if you need an eye, that is yours. So this is the point in the reading where I would do that check-in. I'd be like, how y'all doing? Everybody good? How are the poems reaching you? But I don't know who you are, where you are in the world. So I'm thinking about how you all are doing, and I'm gonna read a couple more poems from this section. This is called Talking with My Boss About Diversity and Inclusion. Sometimes she says they, sometimes she says you. She's talking about Black people. When she says they, I try to forgive, to remember she is not American and therefore misses some things, especially the nuance or apparent contradiction of race not equaling phenotype. Or Black people having, how could it be, blonde hair and blue eyes even when both parents are Black. Or my own mother being an Arab, which we mostly don't consider an iteration of Blackness and not American born. When she says you, I believe she is doing me a favor. All right, this is Self-Portrait as Homo sapiens. The idea of integration, the illusion of separateness, the denial of oneness, the statement of feeling, the illusion of speech, the language of illusion, the discernment of being, the statement of denial, the illusion of idea, the being of speech, the oneness of denial, the separateness of language, the integration of integration. So, I am going to do something that's a little bit scary for me. I'm reading all new work, as you know, but I am about to read to you the long poem that exists at the center of this second collection. And the poem is called On the Overnight from Agadir. And just a little context before I get into it. I went to Morocco in 2015 for what I thought would be a year on a Fulbright to finish my first collection, which I did finish at the beginning of that year, and to conduct genealogical research and begin this second collection and also a nonfiction project. And about 2 months into my time in Morocco, I was on an overnight bus that crashed, and it was devastating. And 2 months in the hospital, and I was medevac to Zurich, where I had lived with my ex-partners from Switzerland, and was, in the hospital for 2 months, a number of surgeries, a long convalescence, and I ended up in my childhood bedroom in the Bronx, which is where I recovered and where I spent the majority of my Fulbright year. So I eventually got back there, but since that time, I've been thinking about the metaphysical questions inside that experience, the spiritual questions inside that experience, to think that you're going to your ancestral homeland and to end up home, quite literally, in a different way. And so this is the first time that I'm going to read the entirety of this poem, and just so that you can pace yourselves, it'll take me about 11 minutes to read. It's called On the Overnight from Agadir, and there are 2 epigraphs. If it must be winter, let it be absolutely winter. Linda Gregg. Nevertheless, live. Gwendolyn Brooks. Don't go to discover your roots, Ladybug says. If you want to look for roots, go and look at a tree. Another day at a cafe, avoiding, pretending. Why did you come here? Tell me why. If you want to die, go ahead and die. Do it quickly. If you want to be dead, you can be dead. But the days are long and always the same. But the nights are long and always the same. I feel that time has me in a way. Do you know? A tree. But do you see its roots when you look at a tree? The syringa from the cover of that playbook in high school haunted me for weeks, its net of empty branches. See, that's the problem. That right there. How the mind moves from the one thing that's here, and suddenly I am 55, though it's still 2 o'clock on Tuesday. 2 o'clock on Tuesday happens in Morocco too. My mother says we are European, and I shake my head at her desperate face. My mother says we speak French in Morocco, and I shake my head. Morgan says maybe it could be good for you to travel to the motherland. It's necessary trauma for each of us. I call my ex-partner in Brussels, with whom I'd lived in 7 cities on 3 continents, and say, Habibi, I think I just want my own apartment and a dog, and to stop working like a mule. And we laugh. Morgan says, you have to go. Why do I sense that I cannot trust what I feel in my chest? Are there even trees in North Africa? If you don't want to live, you don't want to live anywhere. Avoiding what? I'm sorry, but there's no other way to say it, meaninglessness. So that is why you get on a plane and go to the third world for a year? I don't know. Clearly, I don't know. And the third world as a phrase is so, did the colonizer kill or make thrive? Did the colonizer kill or make thrive? Honestly, who cares? I don't need history to justify me. I just want a dog. I wouldn't mind having a Moroccan lover, I tell my shrink, out of things to say. Perhaps taking a Moroccan lover, ideally a Black one, will help you feel connected to yourself in a new way and rejuvenate your enthusiasm for living, your sense of purpose. I fire my shrink on the spot, call the second one as I'm leaving the office and fire her too. On the street, a Frenchie shits on the curb, her owner on the phone looking the other way. I know exactly who I am. It's that there is no point, and then I'm telling you, just go and look at a tree. Then, in the early morning hours, on a bus almost returned to Rabat, a razor of light slits my eye down the center. Suddenly, the bus on its side, dirt in the air, stars in the dirt. In one skull, an eye looks west, another east. A hand cuts the smoke inside the bus. Into a net of glass, a girl's face is pressed. He stepped over a woman his Omi's age, hijab beside her, blonde hair exposed, her arms and legs splayed into a geometric shape. He threw himself from the bus's side, a tingling from his shoulder to his thumb. A green eye, a brown eye, in the same skull. A child and a man merged at the waist, 2 heads, 2 torsos, no feet. On the side of the road, weeds, a cough, another, no horns, a light, some trees. Inside the darkness, my eyes make a dark, all outline. It hangs heavy over me. Its empty face locked on my emptied face, holding us in mutual study. Then a slow lifting, and I breathe awake. Awake in the hospital bed, my phone rings. Ladybug. You thought you were going to Morocco, she says, laughing. You were going to the body. I know the doctor says he's fine, but he cannot feel his hand. I know, but the doctor says he's fine. The doctor says he'll be back to his old self in no time. What language were you speaking? Did you reach his parents? I know he doesn't want them to come, but has the mother been informed? Of her Blackness or that of her children? Stop. The boy's neck. Has the mother been informed of the neck? Dear one, I was trying to enter my own life. I felt outside my own life. I was looking, trying to find a door, to quiet the mind I knew I was more than. I wanted to control only what I could control. I wanted nothing grand, epiphanic, oracular. On the contrary, I wanted to be small, to disturb and be disturbed, the absolute least. Silly? Naive? The clock kept telling me my birthday, 12/27, every day for a year. I saw it twice. You were waiting to live. It happens to the best of us. Whatever you're looking for is not here. If he wants to be dead, he can be dead. Dear one, I thought the clock was telling me to start over, that I could start over any time. I mean, 2 births a day? As the bus tilted onto its side and crashed, I saw all I would not become. A thin book turned into a face, the face turned into 4. My work, I exclaimed inwardly to no one in particular as we hit the gravel. I have not done my work. Mo brings me coffee in the snow to the Upper West Side, all the way from Brooklyn, and says, baby, you weren't supposed to be there. You weren't supposed to be there, and the ancestors saved you. A wooden bowl of unripe persimmons on my friend's coffee table, a ball of yogurt with raw honey, Randall Kennedy's nigger splayed open looking up at the off-white ceiling. Morgan meets me for brunch so I can start getting back into the world, still in a neck brace. I phone my old shrink from college and say, can you believe this shit? I almost can't. And we laugh. Mo says, you weren't supposed to be there, baby. And we post pics on Facebook to make our friends smile. Look, you did not listen to yourself, by which I mean the child inside you. And I don't care how that sounds. I hit reply to the email, then X out of the draft. I hit reply again, then go down the hall for tea. I mean, the injury took you back to Zurich, where you had tried to love a man into being your father, then to your childhood bedroom in the Bronx. You can't make that shit up. I carry my tea back to the desk. It goes cold before I take a sip. Dear one, another bed, flat on my back again, returned to the waiting. I am waiting for the neck to heal, to live. What generates this sensation that life is elsewhere or happening in the future? That it will begin once the neck has healed and I arrive in California, where it will begin once I am worthy of living, or once I feel comfortable more often than I do not, or once I can provide for myself in a 2-bedroom apartment, where it will begin once I no longer look without for an answer, or once I no longer feel drawn to Morocco, to our pain, or once, where does the self hide when it hides? Where was I if I didn't know why I was there? Where does the inquiry begin? Does it begin in my particular body, in my particular mind? Does it begin centuries before me? Does it begin in my mother? Does it begin in all these places once the market tries to close? Once the mother gives her son a face he can use? It's not the skin so much as it is the shape of the bones beneath it, the way they form a gestalt. Once the father says, come back, my boy, I see you. I want you to know that I see you. Listen, I have mulled this over ad nauseum. All obvious interpretations are stolid, lacking, uncompelling. That my home is not there, that I needed to leave, that I had to care better for my body, that my body did not belong to me, that nothing is ordered, everything is random, that nothing is random, everything is ordered. If you will not use your voice to speak, your voice will be taken. It is not your work, silly boy. If you will not do it, your gifts will be passed to another. Thank you, sir, for driving slowly, I tell him from the back seat. When I was last here, I was badly hurt. Yes, they told me at the Riyadh, he says, pulling down the neck of his t-shirt, I have something to show you. A scar from his hairline down the length of his spine. What highway is this? The A3. It runs north to south, from Kaza to Agadir. Okay. So this would really be the moment where I check in with folks and see how everybody's doing. So this is me checking in with you all. I hope that everybody's good. So I'm going to read just a few more poems from the third section of the book, which is really to do with the speaker's relationship or relationships to time and presence and present moment inhabitation and the difficulty of that in the face of the social difference, the violent social difference, right, that exists in our world. So I think I'll do 4 if I have time for that. Joni, am I good? Yeah, okay. So this is an excerpt from Crown of Sonnets called Little Red Lighthouse. And there is an epigraph from Rilke, future, who won't wait for you? Prepare for the life, Father says. He means almost nothing by it, nothing sinister, only good. He thinks he is helping. He thinks he is offering the words he wished his father had offered. It is banal like that. So the mind taking hold starts to look anywhere but here. How to prepare. A road leads into a forest, or a highway curves into a city, or several dirt paths extend from a single circle of dirt. But the feet are not moving. Do you know? The feet are looking before they cross. The feet are looking before they cross. The hands, tongue, and lungs too. You leave the room to find yourself, back in the room you just left. You repeat time. The walls change color, sky blue, fire brick, bumblebee. The gladiola dies, then revives. A new frame for the old photo of the lighthouse beneath the bridge. The room empties, the room fills. Time repeats you, fixed, as though yourself the decoration. You stand still trying to prepare. On exiting Universitätsspital on New Year's Eve 2015, after breaking my neck in Morocco 4 years after leaving Switzerland, the open air had the predictable sparkle. After 2 months, not only indoors, but flat on my back, mostly waiting for the neck they kept cutting open to heal. So that when they wheeled me out through double doors and the tram passed across my field of view and the scattered strangers flecked the white blur my eyes made, like floaters after a long sleep, I felt sudden in my plexus, the exact angle of loss I had lived with when I lived here, as though it had waited for me to return, so as to enter me again, as though I had not lived years without it, elsewhere, where they say life is, regardless of where you are. So that as the bells of the Fraumünster rang from inside the steeples, the tail of the lake stretching out of view between the hills on either side, I became, as an actor becomes, animated, populated by someone else's feelings, someone else's spirit. And now, a few years later still, I know to ask if this complex of feeling, deep frozen, waiting for me, was, in a way, my actual life. Not a portion of the life, not a possible life, but my messy and patient, actual, implausible, resilient, improbable life. All right, y'all, 2 more. This is called Looking Down, or Is It Up? Chicago Avenue, Evanston, Illinois, the morning after Thanksgiving. The fire inside me burns to the left. My hope dims, in need of direction. Sex excites me, but is not enough. I wait for a new starting point, as though life will begin there and then. Do you know what I mean? Not what I'm saying, what I mean. Is it possible my function is to hold all the intricate interstitial pain and articulate clarity? Tie a boat to my hands, I sprout wings. Give me a pair of shoes, I grow fins. Every morning, I try to trick myself into focus, motivation. I know you know how I feel, because I feel it. When the new beginning comes, what then? Does life suddenly reset like an Atari? Does meaning emerge assertively and without invitation? I am begging to know, though I know the answer is inside me. The task is to live well enough with you. But how? How do you know what you want if you don't tell you, if you don't hear you? And I'm going to close with a poem called Worthiness. And I just want to say that It takes me about 4.5 minutes to read. I just want to let everybody pace themselves. It's about 2.5 pages of one-line stanzas. And I wrote it last summer, thinking about and processing all the energy around BLM in the aftermath of Mr. George Floyd's murder, and some of the national discussions that were being inspired at that time. And I want to thank everybody who I can't see in the audience again for being here and for holding space for me and my poems and for listening. This is called Worthiness, and I'm actually going to take a sip of water. Excuse me, y'all. Worthiness. Guns and tear gas on TV are not where I want to begin. The rejection for me came from both directions. Home was not a place in any sense, an idea defined by its absence. What about here? What about now? I know to ask myself. Years ago, I hurt my neck in an accident, I write, and before I can finish, I turn away from me. Who was the first who turned away? Some say I lack the right to complain because I still have breath. I try to be deliberate, to be present inside the time that partitions the day. Time is less a measure of what is, more a framework of control, a structuring tool. I understand so little about progress. An hour reflects the notion that we belong and are separate at once. Some call grief complaint. Once, an acquaintance performing both conviction and lament, how hard it must be to walk into a room and be neither black nor white. His motivation not to empathize, but to test a hypothesis, to ask me who I was, not seeing he had already decided. I admit I fail at being present. I prepare for the hour I lose by preparing. The self I inhabit is fluid, shifting, I know to remind myself. The chokehold originates in the martial arts, a position of active defense. Air chokes and blood chokes are the two types. In both instances, the purpose is to induce an unconscious state, even death. As the measures of day proceed, an unconscious state becomes my objective. You'll have to forgive me for being heavy. Speaking to you here like this is the most difficult thing I can do. The presence it requires is agonizing, feels fatal. On a cellular level, trauma is inscribed into the body of the person who survives it, scientists confirm. Some say the word trauma is overused these days to the extent its meaning is diminished. The intention of the chokehold is to induce an unconscious state. Unconscious states vary in nature and origin. In waking dreams, before I wake, the tasks of the day assert themselves. One task is to go to the gym. One task is to deconstruct racial constructs. Guns and tear gas are not where I would choose to begin. I try to be deliberate, to be present. In a way, my to-do list seems manageable, even standard. I reduce each task to its constituent parts for efficiency and practicability. In an email to a student, I explained to racialize is the act of assigning a racial category to a person's body, e.g., an Arab from the Maghreb, his mother in the United States is racialized as Black. Scientists say there is no single physical attribute that establishes a so-called race. Scientists say trauma lives inside the body and is passed on generationally. Physiologically, joy is a surge of dopamine and serotonin in the brain. In an experience of joy, it is unclear whether physiology or event comes first. 8.5 minutes of a knee on a neck is not formally a chokehold. The choke of chokehold points less to the neck of the victim, more to the hands of the perp, e.g., you can choke a pen, a water hose, a clothesline. 8.5 minutes of a knee on a neck is more akin to, and I turn away from me again. Is one's psychology a spiritual or physiological occurrence? If he felt scared or threatened, or even a pressure to do his job in a way he had fundamentally misinterpreted but believed in because reinforced by the system he worked for and within, why was his face so neutral, so casual? The act of racialization occurs instantly, prior to applying interpretations of gender or age, scientists say. In the late aughts, popular culture felt the need to recast homophobia. You're not scared, you're just an asshole, the meme said. Racism is not etymologically conceived as fear. The ism suffix forms action nouns of verbs, e.g., baptism is the action noun of the verb baptize. Race, by this logic, would be a verb root. Racism, the act of performing race. The sinister connotation of racism suggests the race being performed by racism is sinister. If racism exists to uphold the supremacy of the white racial category, whiteness, by this logic, is sinister. I try to be deliberate, to inhabit the present moment that agitates me into fleeing. Being here now with you, speaking here now with you, is the most difficult thing I can do. I am not being rational. I am trying to reduce the present into its constituent parts. Last month, a student emailed me to say she was too scared to go to any class but ours. It was not a compliment. I did not take it as a compliment. I am tired of apologizing for the heaviness of what I am required to discuss in order to live. I tell the student she is worthy. I ask her to write a poem about her worthiness. When I turn away from the day, I enter an unconscious state. I seek it. Though years ago I wrote, I want to enter my life like a room. Thank you so much, y'all, for listening. Thank you. Thanks.
Oh, Sharif, that was beautiful. Thank you. Holy cow.
Thank you.
Holy cow. Wow. So, you get a drink of water. If we could have, if I can ask some questions. And
Sure.
while my head is still whirling from your reading, from your poems, I'm going to start with a question that I've been thinking since reading Into Each Room We Enter Without Knowing. And it's, basically it's like, where's your music? Where do you get, where does your music come from? Is your poems discuss, explore, finger, the tactile experience of ways existence is woven together and comes apart. I'm thinking of the coherence of the song, of the music, of the poems.
Mm-hmm.
I think of, I don't know, I don't know about Morocco, but Irish. Certainly a lot of poets get associated with Irishness. But it's like, how did you step into poetry? How do you do that?
How did I come to poetry? Is that okay?
Yeah, I guess it's two questions.
Okay, music and how I came into poetry. I think the honest answer to the first part of your question is that I don't know. And I kind of wish sometimes when asked about influences, right, and what sources we draw from, that many of us could maybe be a bit more forthright about the part of that process that we couldn't possibly ever know, really. I can tell you who I am consciously engaged with and which other poets I read and have read deeply. But the way that all of that kind of bubbles into creative impulse with which comes song is really impossible for me to account for, you know. So I hope that doesn't feel like a sidestep to your question.
No.
I'm not really sure.
What about your earliest experience of poetry?
The second part about coming to poetry. I was raised in a culture of silence around the very things that, in my experience and in my estimation, we needed to be talking about because they were too painful for us to engage, right? And so that was sort of what was happening, right, at home and in my personal experience. And then concurrent to that was my formal education. And most of what I experienced for a large part of my formal education, was a kind of hoop jumping. This is the task. How well can you perform? But there were poems that peppered that experience. Thankfully, to a handful of teachers, and really probably two, and primarily one in high school, who I was fortunate enough to study with for 3 out of the 4 years of high school. Who exposed me to poems that stopped me in my tracks. And, I heard the poem and I couldn't believe what it was that I had just heard or that I had experienced. And, I just continued to pursue that. I mean, really, that was what it was. It was the only thing one of the only things that I had encountered in my formal education that helped me feel connected to a larger sense of humanity, the world, that helped me feel alive in a new way. And so I just pursued that feeling and that experience. And started to do poetry workshops in college, and it went from there. So
right on. Oh, yeah. Good. Wow. Hey, were there a couple of some questions have come from some audience? From Willow has a question.
Hi, Willow.
Yeah. How have your interactions with your students shaped your poetry?
I love to teach, and it is such a gift. It is such a gift to be able to teach poetry to young people, interested in it or not. And so I find my teaching practice and my writing practice to be inextricable and kind of circular in a way, that there is a motivation that I experience when I encounter a student through my work of teaching who breaks open, to new possibilities upon encounter of a single poem, where they begin to think differently about what a poem is and what the possibilities for writing poetry can be, and perhaps even more importantly, the reasons to write it. So many of my students come in to the classroom, with beliefs about poetry that I very quickly try to disabuse them of. That a poem is a puzzle actively hiding its deeper meaning from you, and the whole point of reading a poem is to figure out what the color red in line 7 means, like that. And it's cultivated. It is a cultivated orientation to the poem that folks need to unlearn, and when I offer up to my students that, I really believe what I'm about to say, like in my bones, I believe that the most important question we can ask of a poem is how it can enhance our life, like what it is that it can teach us about being alive on the planet, and it doesn't need to be fundamentally transformative. It doesn't need to be a large thing. It could be tiny, 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 but you just carry it in your pocket and continue on, that is so much more meaningful, the human value of it. And so I'm deeply inspired by that. I'm deeply, deeply inspired by those conversations, and they keep me returning to the page. So thank you so much for that question, Willow.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yes. And your poems also, keep me to returning to the page. It just, there's a little, being reminded the poetry is real, and it comes alive in conversation with students, and it comes alive in your pages. Now, here's a question from Maya Washington. Just what has been your journey during the pandemic? as a writer and as a human?
Hi, Maya. Thank you so much for that question, Maya Washington. My journey during the pandemic as a writer and as a human. I have relocated during the pandemic. So I left my job at Stanford and the Bay Area and moved here to Illinois for this position at Northwestern. So I think it's been even more unconventional than it would have been had I just stayed where I've been living. And so on a practical level, that's been, a kind of day-to-day consequence, a challenging consequence of the pandemic, which is integrating into a place that's effectively closed. Like, how do you do that, right? So, on a personal level, I guess I would start with that. But as a writer, or on a human level, which is how you phrased it, as a writer, I have found myself, maybe ironically turning away from poems. I don't know that I've really generated a lot of new material during the pandemic. I mean, the final poem that I wrote last summer after the pandemic had already taken hold. But I think what I've tried to do anyway is identify the silver lining or the improbable gifts of this time, what it is that I can take, and my love, my orientation to love and to community and to be there for my people, I think has only been burnished and deepened. And so, despite the pain and the difficulty of this time for all of us, there is some sliver of gratitude that I feel for the way that it's kind of demanded of me a certain reckoning or accounting, and has demanded the same of those around me. So
yeah.
Thank you, Maya.
Great question. Here's a question from Timothy Liu.
Oh, hey, Tim.
Hey, which is, what long poems did you keep close to you as you wrote your long poem? Did the poem begin as short poems that wanted to be fused together, or could you sense a larger, capacious arc wanted to assert itself?
I love that question. I love that question came from you, Timothy. Thank you for that question. The poem definitely came in pieces, and I had a sense before I even began to write it that it was going to be a very long poem, and the question was really how long. I thought for a moment that it might actually just be a book-length thing, where it was its own poem, and I generated a lot of material that didn't make its way into the poem. In wanting to value, in thinking about the making of it, an expansiveness, a capaciousness, as you say, without the loss of the smallness, the distillation that's so important to me within the lyric space. And there was a lot of material that I ended up cutting. I don't think, I understand why you asked which long poems I kept close to me, but I don't know that I did, actually. I think the way that I turn to other voices for inspiration is really about a kind of visceral response that I have to individual poems or to the work at large, irrespective of how different those poems might be from what I'm trying to make or my own poems. So I think the poetic touchstones, the voices that are always very close to me, which were again the voices that remain close to me. So thank you for that question, Tim.
Lovely. So, well, we're getting, I guess, close to wrap up time. But before we head out, I hope you would read us another poem, please. I think that's a good way to head out. And but before you do, I'm going to point out to people that this book, Into Each Room We Enter Without Knowing, you can purchase it at Buffalo Street Books here in Ithaca, or in Evanston, Illinois, Bookends and Beginnings. Green Apple Books in San Francisco, East Bay Booksellers in Oakland, Illinois. It's a really good read. And thank you, everyone, for coming. And please send.
Sure. Thank you, Joni, and thank you again, everyone, for being here. So I'll close with a poem from the book, which is called Passing. At a station in a no-name town, a blue-red coleus blooms from a cleft in the track. Too obvious, I say, out loud, to the window, to God, to no one, rolling my white eyes into my thick, bright head. If I arrive, who will greet me as brother, as owner? Who will greet me at all, feeling from my veins the pull of our one long pulse? Pissing into the metal bin, my waist streaming out onto the track, I laugh at the mirror, an animal, unhinging, trying to see what they see in whatever I am standing here. Then the train slides into a long tunnel. The lights flicker off, and I am back inside my mother.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. And thank you to the Zelazniks and for coming out this evening.